There's a figure, almost a myth, from a time not so long ago. The family doctor. He didn't just work in a clinic. He walked the streets of your town. He knew your name, your parents' names, and the name of your dog. He'd show up at your door with a worn leather bag in hand and sit by your bed. He was a constant, a comfort, a pillar of the community, welcomed into the most private parts of your life with a cup of tea, an absolute, unquestioning trust. This figure represented the best of us: care, compassion, healing. But this is a story about how that perfect image, that sacred trust, was the best disguise a monster ever wore. Because in the small English town of Hyde, there was a man everyone knew as Dr. Shipman. Fred to his friends, a kind, reassuring family man. He was considered the best doctor in town, attentive, thorough, the one you hoped to get when you called the practice. He was, by all accounts, the perfect family doctor. And he was also the most prolific serial killer in modern history. A predator who used the tools of healing to take more than 250 lives. It makes you stop and think, doesn't it? You trust your doctor with your body, with your secrets, with your very life. They have a power over you that almost no one else does. But what happens when that trust isn't just misplaced? What happens when the trust itself is the murder weapon? This is the story of that betrayal. The story of a man who turned compassion into a weapon and turned the homes of his patients into tombs. This is the story of Harold Shipman, the betrayer. To understand how a man like Harold Shipman could exist, you first have to understand the world that created him. Imagine Britain in the decades after World War II. A nation rebuilding itself, making a new promise to its people. The National Health Service, the NHS. It wasn't just a healthcare system. It was a source of national pride, a belief that everyone, rich or poor, deserved care. And at the very heart of this new world was the general practitioner, the GP. The family doctor was put on a pedestal. They weren't just employees. They were gatekeepers, confidants, almost saints in white coats. In the small, tight-knit communities of northern England, the doctor's word was law. You simply did not question it. To challenge a doctor's diagnosis or their decision was seen as an act of profound disrespect. This system wasn't built on checks and balances. It was built on an older, more powerful idea: faith. And into this world of absolute faith, a different kind of man was being made. Harold Shipman grew up in a working-class family in Nottingham. He was known as a quiet boy, a bit of a loner, but he was deeply attached to one person, his mother, Vera. She was the driving force in his life, and he adored her. When he was just a teenager, she was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. In those final agonizing months, young Harold became her devoted caretaker. He watched her every day, saw her pain, her decline. And he saw something else. He saw the local doctor make his daily house calls. He watched, fascinated, as the doctor gave her a dose of morphine. And he saw the drug's profound effect. He saw how this simple injection could bring peace, how it could ease suffering, how it could, in an instant, grant a moment of blissful relief. He was watching his mother die, but he was also learning his first and most important lesson, a lesson in power. He learned that a doctor, with a syringe in hand, had the ultimate authority, the power to control pain, the power to grant comfort, the power to decide what a patient feels and when. He saw how giving a drug was wrapped in the language of care and compassion, even as it brought someone closer to the end. He was learning that the line between healing and killing was terrifyingly thin, and that a doctor's uniform was the perfect shield to stand on either side of it. After his mother's death, Shipman's path seemed set. He threw himself into his studies, an ambition now burning inside him. He was accepted into medical school, a bright and promising student. He married, started a family, and in 1974, he took his first job as a GP at a medical practice in Todmorden, a small town in Yorkshire. On the surface, everything was perfect. He was living the dream. Dr. Shipman, respected, admired. But deep beneath that calm, professional surface, the first cracks were beginning to show. Within a year, his colleagues started noticing things. His handwriting on prescriptions grew erratic. His behavior, sometimes distant. The truth was, Dr. Shipman had a secret. He had become addicted to an opioid painkiller called pethidine. He wasn't just using it. He was writing fake prescriptions for his patients, then collecting the drugs for himself, forging signatures, lying every single day to feed his addiction, and eventually he got caught. It was a clear-cut case of fraud and professional misconduct. This was the moment, the first critical test for a system built on faith. The system had a choice. It could have seen the deception, the willingness to break the law, the betrayal of patient trust, and it could have removed him from medicine forever. But it didn't. Instead, Harold Shipman was given a small fine. He was sent to a drug rehabilitation clinic for a short time. And then, after that brief pause, he was allowed to practice medicine again. The system chose to believe in the myth of the good doctor. It chose to see a man who had made a mistake, who had learned his lesson, who deserved a second chance. It chose to forgive. And in doing so, it rearmed a man who had already shown who he was. It was a choice that would have consequences, beyond anyone's darkest imagination. After leaving Todmorden in disgrace, Harold Shipman needed a fresh start. And in 1977, he found one in the bustling market town of Hyde, just outside Manchester. He joined a local medical practice, and to everyone around him, the story was one of redemption. A good doctor who had made a mistake with prescription drugs, paid the price, and was now ready to serve the community. He was charming. He was dedicated. He worked hard to build a reputation. And over the next 15 years, he succeeded. He eventually opened his very own single GP practice on Market Street. He was no longer just a doctor in Hyde. He was the doctor, Dr. Shipman, a man his patients trusted with their lives. And all the while, he was killing them, one by one, quietly, methodically, in the very place they felt safest. His method was a masterpiece of deception, a crime built entirely around the architecture of trust he had so carefully constructed. The victims were almost always the same: elderly women, often living alone. The very people who relied on him the most, who saw his visits as a comfort, a lifeline. The location was almost always their own home. He would arrive for a routine house call, a checkup, or to deliver some news. He'd sit with them in their living rooms, surrounded by their photographs, their memories, their lives. The weapon was not a gun or a knife or anything that would leave an obvious mark. It was a syringe, filled with a lethal dose of diamorphine, medical-grade heroin. A drug he had seen bring peace to his mother, now repurposed as an instrument of silent, untraceable death. And the motive? It wasn't money. It wasn't rage. It was something far more chilling: power, an addiction to the ultimate act of control, the quiet, godlike authority of deciding who lives and who dies. He would watch the life fade from their eyes, the master of their final moment on earth. But the murder itself was only half of the act. The true genius of his evil lay in what came next, the cover-up. After administering the fatal injection, he wouldn't flee. He would stay. He would be the one to discover the body. He would call the family, his voice filled with practiced sympathy, to deliver the sad news. He would comfort the grieving relatives, explaining that their mother or grandmother had passed away peacefully, that her heart had simply given out. And then he would perform the final, devastating act of betrayal. He would take out his pen, and as the attending physician, he would sign the official death certificate himself. Cause of death, natural causes. The crime and its concealment were one and the same. There was no suspicion, because the person who would normally raise the alarm was the killer himself. He made murder look like a quiet, dignified end, and he did it over and over and over again. Imagine a Tuesday afternoon. The kettle has just boiled. An 81-year-old woman, let's call her Eleanor, waits in her favorite armchair for a visit from her doctor. She's known Dr. Shipman for years. He always takes the time to ask about her grandchildren. He's been so kind since her husband passed. Today, he's just coming to check her blood pressure. Nothing to worry about. He arrives, just as promised. He smiles, hangs his coat, and sits down opposite her. He asks how she's feeling. He's calm. He's gentle. He takes out his medical bag. Everything is exactly as it should be. A routine of care she has known her entire life. He tells her he's just going to give her a little something to make her feel better. An injection. She rolls up her sleeve without a second thought. Why would she question him? He's the doctor. She feels a small prick in her arm. A warmth spreads through her veins. She might feel a wave of dizziness, a sudden confusion. She might try to speak, to ask what's happening, but her body is already shutting down. Her breathing slows, her vision blurs, and the last thing Eleanor ever sees is the kind, compassionate face of her trusted family doctor watching her die. Minutes later, the phone rings in her daughter's home. It's Dr. Shipman. His voice is grave, but soothing. He's so sorry to have to tell her. Her mother has passed away. It was very peaceful. He was with her at the end. She didn't suffer. And the daughter, through her tears, thanks him. She thanks him for being there. She thanks him for his dedication, his kindness, his care. He has not only taken her mother's life, he has made her grateful for it. That was the sickening perfection of his method. For years, this was his pattern. Invisible, unquestioned. But as the number of his victims grew, so did his arrogance. His addiction to control began to evolve. It wasn't enough to just play God with their lives. He started to believe he had the right to their legacies too. And that is when he made his first and fatal mistake. The mistake was centered around a woman named Kathleen Grundy. She wasn't just another patient. She was 81 years old, vibrant, full of life, and the former mayoress of Hyde. She was a prominent and wealthy figure in the town. On June 24, 1998, Mrs. Grundy was found dead in her home. The last person to see her alive, just a few hours earlier, had been Dr. Shipman, who had visited to take a routine blood sample. He certified her death, telling her family she had died of old age. It was another sad but seemingly normal death of an elderly patient. But then, something happened that was far from normal. A new will from Mrs. Grundy suddenly appeared. It was a shocking document. It left the vast majority of her nearly £400,000 estate to one person, Dr. Harold Shipman. Her own children were cut out almost entirely. The will was crude, it was poorly typed, and it looked suspicious. especially to one person, Kathleen Grundy's daughter, Angela Woodruff. Angela wasn't just a grieving daughter, she was a solicitor, a lawyer. Her mind was trained to see details, to spot inconsistencies, to question everything. And as she looked at that document, she felt a cold, sickening certainty. The will was a forgery, and if the doctor had faked her will, what else had he done? Angela Woodruff refused to do what everyone else in that town had done for years. She refused to blindly accept the doctor's word. While the police initially dismissed her concerns, she was relentless. She knew with every fiber of her being that something was terribly wrong. She was a daughter who had lost her mother, but she was about to become the force that would unmask a monster. Angela Woodruff's suspicion was a single stone tossed into a calm, dark lake, and the ripples began to spread. Armed with her legal knowledge and a daughter's certainty, she took her case to the police. But here, she hit a wall of disbelief. To the authorities in Hyde, this was Dr. Shipman, a man they knew, a man they trusted. The idea that he was a murderer who had crudely forged a will for money, it seemed absurd, preposterous. They saw a grieving daughter, perhaps confused, perhaps mistaken. The power of Shipman's reputation was a shield, deflecting all accusation. But Angela was relentless. She would not be dismissed. Her persistence forced the police to open a file, and as they began to dig, they uncovered a disturbing truth. This wasn't the first time concerns had been raised about Dr. Shipman. In fact, just a few months earlier, another local doctor, Dr. Susan Booth, had noticed an alarming pattern. An incredible number of Shipman's patients were dying, and a shocking number of them were being cremated, destroying any evidence of foul play. She had flagged her concerns to the coroner. A secret, informal police investigation had taken place, but it was a failure. The investigators were young, inexperienced, and they too were blinded by the myth of the good doctor. They checked his records, which he had expertly falsified, and found nothing wrong. The case was closed. The system had another chance to stop him, and it failed. This time, however, with the forged will as a piece of concrete evidence, things were different. The investigation, now led by Detective Superintendent Bernard Posels, began to move. They had the will. They had Angela's testimony, but they needed proof. They needed to know what was in Kathleen Grundy's body. And so, the police took a drastic, almost unheard of step. They went to a judge and got permission to exhume the body. On a grim August morning in 1998, in a quiet churchyard, a team of police and forensic scientists dug into the earth. They lifted the coffin of the former mayoress from its grave. It was a moment of profound gravity. The final desperate search for a truth that had been buried 6 feet deep. Samples were taken, rushed to a laboratory, and when the results came back, they were undeniable. Kathleen Grundy's body contained a massive, lethal dose of diamorphine. This was not a natural death. It was murder. The wall of trust that had protected Harold Shipman for over 2 decades, finally, catastrophically, shattered. On September 7, 1998, police arrived at Harold Shipman's surgery. They arrested him. The man who held the power of life and death was now in handcuffs. As investigators raided his home, they found the tool he had used to forge the will, an old typewriter hidden away. The net had closed. His trial began in October 1999. It was a spectacle. Shipman himself was calm, arrogant, and detached. He denied everything. He claimed the victims had died of natural causes, and that his medical records, which he had altered on his computer just hours after their deaths, were the truth. The prosecution focused on just 15 specimen cases, including Kathleen Grundy, to present a clear, undeniable pattern of behavior to the jury. After a grueling trial, the jury took 6 days to reach their verdict. On January 31, 2000, the foreman stood guilty on all 15 counts of murder. The judge sentenced Harold Shipman to 15 consecutive life sentences with a recommendation that he should never, ever be released. But the story was far from over, because everyone in that courtroom knew the 15 victims were just the beginning. In his prison cell, Shipman remained defiant. He never explained, never apologized, never confessed. To the families of his hundreds of other suspected victims, he offered only silence. Then, on the eve of his 58th birthday in 2004, Harold Shipman took the one thing he had left to control: his own life. He hanged himself in his cell. It was his final act of power, his last gesture of contempt. He took his secrets to the grave, cheating hundreds of families of the answers they so desperately craved. But the British government was determined to find the truth. They launched a massive public investigation, the Shipman Inquiry, led by Dame Janet Smith. For 2 years, her team meticulously reviewed thousands of medical records, death certificates, and witness testimonies. They dug into every corner of Shipman's career, from his first days as a doctor to his last. And what they found was staggering. It was an industrial scale of killing, hidden in plain sight. The inquiry officially confirmed that Harold Shipman had murdered at least 215 of his patients, but they concluded the real number was likely higher. The most probable count was 250. 250 lives, taken by the man they trusted to save them. The legacy of Harold Shipman wasn't just a number, it was a wound, a deep, profound wound on the soul of a nation. He had taken the most sacred relationship in medicine, the bond between a doctor and a patient, and turned it into a predator's charter. The fallout was a revolution in British medical practice. The entire system of death certification, a system that had relied on the unquestioning trust of a single doctor, was torn down and rebuilt. New laws were passed to create checks and balances. The handling of controlled drugs was drastically reformed. An entire profession was forced to look inward, to confront the horrifying reality that the myth of the good doctor had provided the perfect cover for a monster. We began this story with an image, the trusted family doctor, welcomed into our homes. That image is now forever haunted. Harold Shipman did more than just kill his patients. He killed a part of our certainty, our faith. He left behind a chilling question that lingers in the quiet of every examination room, a question about who we trust and why. He proved that the most dangerous monster isn't the one who breaks down your door, it's the one you invite inside. Shipman weaponized trust, but other killers weaponize something even more intimate: desire. To see how one man used charm to become America's most infamous monster, click the thumbnail.